So let's carry on talking about stories coming out of the continent. So we left you with the thought of Kenya's 16% VAT increase on fuel kicking in this week. But what Victor was telling me is that actually was set aside. So
it was set aside yesterday. What happened was they signed. There was an act. I forget the name of it. It was supposed to kick in on September 1st to introduce VAT to the petrol price.
Yeah.
And incidentally, when President Uhuru Kenyatta was out in China for the Forum for China and Africa, suddenly it was introduced. His permanent secretary was left to handle this on his own, and I happened to be in Kenya as that was happening. Suddenly, there were bus trips that were costing twice. There was a bus trip that was 200 shillings, and it moved to 400. Now, you can imagine, the people are objecting, say, this is just going to be too much. So 3 citizens of Kenya, decided to go to court. They tried on Tuesday, they didn't succeed, but yesterday, Bugomba, I think, it was a high court, that said, let's suspend this. And I suspect that might be what President Uhuru Kenyatta wanted. Let's test the waters, because he hasn't signed this act.
Yes.
So it was almost introduced the VAT to fuel, and let's see how the reaction is. I doubt he will sign it, or at least I doubt he will sign it in its original form.
Okay, so it's been reversed.
Well, suspended pending the hearing.
Even at that, they were still going to pay less than we are.
They still pay. Everybody pays less than we are on the African continent when it comes to petrol. That I can tell you
and
without
that breaks my heart completely.
Especially considering that we're supposed to be the most sophisticated. And we keep building all these taxes onto it. You can't tax your way into growth.
Yeah, there you go. Well, the last famous words.
Yeah.
Let's move to Uganda. Bobby Wine, his supporters against President Museveni and the government. This story is just continuing.
A 36-year-old kid from the slums of Kampala, which means he was born, his name is Robert Chalugani. He was born 2 years before Museveni took over as president. Just imagine that. 2 years before Museveni was born, he was born. I mean, he took over as president, he was born. Museveni has been in power since 1986. He increased the limit. Originally, presidents could not go beyond 75 years, but there's an election in 2021 which Museveni wants to contest. He went and changed the rules so that he can run again because he's 74 years of age. This young man who's a musician decided to challenge him. He ran, he lost in the last presidential election. Now he has been arrested. Actually, his driver was killed at one stage. He was assaulted while in detention. He left to go to the States to seek medical treatment. And the reason is, Leanne, funny, President Museveni was campaigning once and driving through, and somebody threw a stone at his car, and they loaded all those charges on this poor kid. So it's just one of those where you deal with opposition in a very brutal way. And I think President Museveni must realize his days are numbered now. If he just thinks of what happened to President Mugabe, he mustn't think he's all
untouchable.
that. And he does think that he's the best gift to Uganda. And although I used to like him when he started, now I just don't know what to make of.
It's getting out of hand. But now there's the 6 Ugandan lawmakers are challenging Museveni in an appeal to petition the Supreme Court to overturn the July lower court decision that upheld Parliament's vote to scrap an age limit of 75 for his presidential candidacy.
Because it's crazy. There was a limit, as I say. You needed to be 35 years of age to run, and you couldn't run after 75. And he just manipulated this, and obviously the courts ruled in his favor, but they're challenging him, and they saw they should. It's a crazy, crazy adjustment. You don't want to be running the country. If you are being challenged by somebody who was 2 when you took over, what are you still doing at 76 wanting to run against him? Shouldn't that tell you your time has come?
I know. The age-old tale of what happens with these
old
leaders
men must
that just
go.
never want to leave office. Nigeria and MTN. This is a love story that is so bitter and twisted, it's frightening. So, last week the central bank ordering MTN to return $8.1 billion in money that they say was allegedly transferred out of the country. And then the Attorney General's office said the operator owed $2 billion in back taxes. So this is basically $10.1 billion that Nigeria is saying that they owe. The company owns Nigeria. What's going on?
Well, you are a big company. MTN owns 40% of the market in Nigeria. So it's number one by far. The contest is always as to who is number 2 and number 3. Number 1 is never in dispute, right? So that's their biggest business on the continent, if not all the emerging markets. The problem is, Leon, I think big business has to realize the rules of business have changed. Triple bottom line is no longer a joke. You have to take care of your social responsibility and your environmental responsibility when you do business. It's no longer just enough to say I'm making money. And I think in this case, all I can say is, if you're going to be doing business in Nigeria, buckle up, put your seatbelt, stick to the speed limit, don't overtake where there is a barrier line, because people have been tempted to think in Nigeria anything goes. It's no longer the case. The country has been reforming its banking sector, and that's why the banks were also bust and fined, because they are wanting to stabilize that economy and make it a lot more regulated. From here, I must just respect the central bank. If they say you owe them or you took money illegally, imagine if the South African Reserve Bank said you took money out of the country illegally. I mean, there's certainly no smoke without fire, is there?
Yes, definitely.
If you are MTN, you'll dispute it, and they're disputing, but the share price is not believing them. It lost more than 25%, I think, by now. So it's an indication, I must say, from where I stand. MTN, remember, has already been fined $1.7 billion for not registering SIM cards. That means they violated RICA regulations. Now, why would you violate RICA regulations in your biggest market? So somewhere big business must realize that if you're going to do business, and Nigeria is still going to be an important country, you got to do it by the book. But I'm waiting for the investigation, and I'm sure it will end up that $2 billion that they are owing in VAT will come down like it happened. But I think we need diplomatic intervention here. But as a general message to big business, the eagles have flown. You got to do business by the book on this continent.
It's a big one, and it really is hammering MTN's share price very, very badly and the company's bottom line. Rwanda, this is your passion. In fact, you're writing a book about this. If there's one African country I'm dying to visit, it is Rwanda. I've only heard good and positive about a country that is literally coming a couple of years out of a horrific genocide, and it is managing to turn itself around in the most remarkable ways. Talk to me about what's going on there, because apparently there were elections last week. We didn't even hear about this.
There were elections, they didn't even make the news. Now, let me tell you, when an African country has elections and you don't read about it in the news, it's good. All right? That's how I judge. You would have read about it if somebody had been... In fact, let me tell you this, Leon. I was in Rwanda from Wednesday last week. I don't remember seeing a banner talking about campaigning. I don't remember seeing a broadcast talking about campaigning. But I must tell you, it wasn't a presidential election, right? So last year in August, they had a presidential election. So they have presidential election at different times because they don't want to have a vacuum. So when you elect a president, the MPs are running the show. When you're electing MPs, the president is running the show. So this is parliamentary. 80 seats up for grabs. 24 of them are reserved for women. So you are guaranteed to have 24 women as MPs. And then the Rwanda Patriotic Front won 40, and the oppositions, including the Democratic Green Party, won the rest of it. So for the first time, they're claiming, hey, we have a democracy because opposition MPs are there.
But Victor, we're going to leave this on a closing note, because there's a lady we need to talk about in Rwanda. As much as we're bragging about how wonderful this African country, there's a lady, Diane Shima Rigwara, 35-year-old businesswoman and women's rights activist, arrested on tax evasion and forgery. But there's so much more to the story. In fact, links coming back to South Africa. What is going on there? We
don't have time to talk about it, right? Rwanda is not a perfect country. And among other things, that the criticism of President Kagame is that he doesn't deal with opposition very well. We will leave it to the people of Rwanda to decide that. But she tried to run for president last year, and there were allegations that she did not meet the requirements. She should have got a certain number of endorsements. She didn't, so they started charging her that. Then her family businesses were brought into the mix. They started being investigated for tax fraud. Her sister, her mother, they were arrested all together. But as I say, I can just say this to South Africans. What you see on the surface is not what's underneath. This is not about tax evasion. This is not about election, whatever. It's much, much deeper than that, and I'm not qualified to talk about it. I can tell you for sure.
So there's a lot of things we need to look into in this story.
Wait, it will reveal itself.
Well, I hope so, because is she in jail right now?
I think, she is
She's
in
in
jail.
jail.
Yeah, she
Okay.
is in jail
I
because
think
somebody else is tweeting on her behalf here.
We need to talk more about this and look into it. And like you say, perhaps do an expose, because this actually comes right back to South Africa as well. The prominent Rigwara business family has a history of conflict in Kagame's government. And, this is something that we have to look into and perhaps follow up more on. Thank you, Victor. Always love Fridays in our conversation. Victor Kgomoeswana, author of Africa is Open to Business, and writing a new book now, and it's focusing in on Rwanda.